Did you have a favorite Disney princess when you were a child? A story that felt like the perfect fairy tale? But what if I told you that the real stories of the women who inspired some of these Disney characters were sometimes so dark and cruel that after watching this video, you might never look at Disney movies the same way again? Let's step away from the world of childhood dreams and dive into the darker side of history. The love story of a beautiful girl whose kindness transforms a terrible beast into a handsome prince has probably made many young hearts tremble at least once. But it probably won't surprise you to learn that the story told in the animated film Beauty and the Beast was not actually invented by Disney. It was based on a fairy tale written by the French writer Gabrielle Suzanne Barbeau de Villeneuve. By the time she published her story, Belle et la Bête, in 1740, Villeneuve was already widowed and living in near poverty. Yet despite her difficult situation, she managed to give the world the very first version of the story about Belle and the Beast. Later, many other writers created their own versions of this fairy tale. You could even call them the fan fiction of the 18th century. But the original story, the one that introduced the world to Belle, belongs entirely to this woman. But did you know that the furry, beast-like hero of this story may actually have a real historical prototype with a very dramatic fate? And in reality, the story behind him was not about love at all, but about a cruel experiment with human lives carried out by members of the royal court. Modern researchers believe that the inspiration for Beauty and the Beast may have been Petrus Gonsalvus, born Pedro González, a man who was born in 1537 on the Canary Islands and suffered from a rare condition called hypertrichosis, which causes excessive hair growth all over the body. As a child, because of his unusual appearance that made him look almost like a wild animal, he was taken from his family and treated like one. He was kept in an iron cage and fed raw meat. When he was 10 years old, he was given as a gift to the King of France, Henry II, who sent the boy to the court of the Duchess of Parma and ordered that he be raised like a nobleman. He was taught proper manners and received an education. But despite all that, for many people at court, he was never truly considered human. To them, he was little more than a curious animal that happened to behave like an aristocrat. After the death of Henry II, his wife Catherine de' Medici arranged a marriage between Gonsalvus and the daughter of one of the court servants, a young woman named Catherine Raffaelin. But Medici's interest in the happiness of the hairy young man had nothing to do with kindness. It was part of an experiment. She was terribly curious to see what their children would look like. And indeed, 4 of their 7 children inherited hypertrichosis. These children later became part of medical curiosity and were eventually sent as exotic gifts to various aristocratic courts across Europe, almost like rare pets. Eventually, the couple managed to gain some independence from the French court and settled in Italy under the protection of the Farnese family. Catherine and Petrus remained married for 40 years. We don't know whether their marriage was a happy one, because very few details have survived. But it's comforting to imagine that Catherine was able to see the soul of the man behind his unusual appearance. Pedro died at the age of 81, and the last known record about him says that he attended the baptism of his grandson. So, one can only hope that this man, whose life had been so difficult, and who had been turned into a monster by the ignorance of his contemporaries, at least managed to find some comfort among his large family. But had you ever heard about this story, and about the drama that may have stood behind one of the most famous fairy tales in the world? And now, let's move on to another Disney classic, probably the most famous creation of Walt Disney himself, Snow White. The plot of Disney's Snow White largely follows the version written by the Brothers Grimm in 1812. The main difference is that in the original story, Snow White does not wake up from a romantic kiss. Instead, the prince begins moving her glass coffin, tilts it slightly, and the piece of poisoned apple stuck in her throat simply falls out. The ending of the original story is also much darker. The evil queen is forced to dance in red-hot iron shoes at Snow White's wedding until she collapses and dies. So, yes, quite a wholesome happy ending. It's quite possible that the brothers did not write this story by accident. They may have heard about a real historical event that happened in Germany 3 centuries before their tale was written. In 1533, a young countess named Margaretha von Waldeck was born. When she turned 16, and rumours about her beauty began spreading throughout the region, she moved to Brussels with her stepmother, Catharina of Hatzfeld. There, Margaret began a romance with the future King Philip II of Spain. Interestingly, Margaret's appearance fits the description of Snow White quite well. Pale skin, dark hair, and bright rosy cheeks. Neither her stepmother nor the prince's powerful relatives approved of this relationship. Not long after, the young countess was poisoned. Who exactly was responsible? It may not even have been her stepmother. Some historians suspect it could have been members of the royal court. But in any case, the life of this 21-year-old young woman ended tragically. But this is not the only theory about the origins of Snow White. In the town of Lohr am Main in Bavaria, locals believe that the real Snow White was Baroness Maria Sophia Margaretha Katharina von Unzuerthal, who was born on June 25, 1725. She was the daughter of Philip Christoph von Erthal, a local ruler, and his wife Baroness von Bettendorf. After his first wife died, Philip remarried, and his new wife quickly developed a deep dislike for her stepdaughter. Even more interestingly, the stepmother actually owned a talking mirror. It was an acoustic toy that her husband had given her as a wedding gift. The mirror was made in 1720, and today it is still displayed in a local museum. And the dwarfs? According to this theory, they may have been inspired by short miners who worked in the nearby village of Biber, west of the town, and surrounded by 7 hills. The tunnels in those mines were extremely narrow, so only small people were hired to work there. The miners also wore bright hooded clothing that strongly resembles the costumes we associate with the dwarfs in the fairy tale. Personally though, I think both of these theories are a little bit of a stretch. Because most likely the Grimm brothers simply found this story in everyday life. After all, how often has an aging stepmother felt jealous of a young and beautiful stepdaughter? Honestly, probably every second time. And if we remember how short women's lives were back then, and how common it was for men to marry 3 or even 4 times in a lifetime, conflicts between stepmothers and stepdaughters must have been happening in almost every household. So tell me, which version of the Snow White story do you believe? Among the many tragic real-life stories behind Disney characters, one stands out in particular, the story of Pocahontas. In the Disney film, it is presented as a romantic love story between a colonist and a Native American princess. But in reality, the story is much sadder and darker. And once you know what really happened, it becomes almost impossible to watch the Pocahontas cartoon again without a heavy feeling. First of all, such a girl really did exist at the end of the 16th century. Her real Native American name was Matoka, which roughly means a flower between 2 streams, or a bright stream between 2 hills. The nickname Pocahontas, meaning little troublemaker, was given to her by her father, the chief of a Native American tribe living in the territory that today is the state of Virginia. In the Disney version, everything looks like a love story. A young woman meets John Smith, and romance begins between them. But in reality, when the English colonists first arrived on those lands, Pocahontas was probably only 10 or 12 years old. In fact, almost everything we know about this story comes from the words of John Smith himself. He claimed that the young daughter of the chief saved his life by throwing herself over his body when the tribe had captured him and was about to crush his skull. And later, according to him, she even became his lover. Modern historians are quite skeptical about Smith's account. Many believe he either invented the story entirely or misunderstood a ceremony that was meant to honor a guest and symbolically make him part of the tribe. But one way or another, the colonists and the local tribes had to find some fragile way to coexist on those lands. And Pocahontas became a kind of bridge between these 2 worlds. She learned English and often visited the English settlement, sometimes even bringing food from her people when the colonists were starving. However, when she was 17, tensions between the colonists and the native population grew again. She was kidnapped and held hostage. The colonists demanded a ransom from her father, including weapons and supplies. Eventually, one of the ways to restore peace was a marriage between Pocahontas and an English colonist named John Rolfe, a tobacco plantation owner. The marriage was meant to guarantee peaceful coexistence between the English and the local tribes. We don't know whether this marriage was truly voluntary or whether Pocahontas was forced into it. But her husband described his feelings for her in a very tender letter, to whom my hearty and best thoughts are. Before the wedding, Pocahontas converted to Christianity and received the baptismal name Rebecca. At the age of 21, her husband took her to England, where she was presented at the royal court. The English wanted to show her to the royal family as an example of a savage who had become a Christian, and also, quite conveniently, to help secure more funding for colonial expansion. She was presented to King James I and even attended social events, where she was treated almost like a real princess. The English called her the King's daughter because that was how they interpreted the status of her father as a tribal chief. But sadly, Pocahontas never made it back to her homeland. She died at just 21 years old, most likely from tuberculosis or dysentery. Her story still remains a dark and complicated chapter in the history of colonization and the history of the New World. Because what for a long time was presented as progress, and the civilizing of native peoples, may in fact have been the forced fate of a very young girl. And if you know any other interesting facts about Pocahontas, be sure to write them in the comments. And if you'd like to see a separate full video about her story, let me know. I'd be happy to make one. Another famous Disney heroine whose story every girl once dreamed about, the red-haired Little Mermaid, may also have a rather sad real-life inspiration. The story behind her actually comes from the life of Hans Christian Andersen, a writer who suffered from unrequited love for most of his life. Historians still debate whether his feelings were directed toward women, men, or perhaps simply toward an idealized idea of love itself. Andersen never married and never had children, but in 1840, he met the famous opera singer Jenny Lind, who was often called the Swedish Nightingale. Andersen was extremely shy around women, and it was very difficult for him to express his feelings. Finally, one day, as Jenny Lind was boarding a train on her way to perform at an opera concert, Andersen handed her a letter in which he proposed marriage. But Lind saw him only as a brother, and the heart of the literary genius was broken. Some historians believe that it was her image that inspired the character of the Little Mermaid. And perhaps it's no coincidence that the villain in the story takes away the most precious thing Ariel has, her beautiful voice. But there is also another theory. Some believe that Andersen actually immortalized Jenny Lind in a different character, the Snow Queen, portraying her as a cold and distant woman, impossible to reach. So the story of one broken love gave the world several beautiful literary works, which later also turned into the beloved animated films we all know today. So, tell me honestly, after this video, will you still be able to watch Disney movies the same way? Or will you now see the real historical stories behind the fairy tales? And if you'd like a part 2 with more real-life inspirations behind famous characters, let me know in the comments and leave a like. See you in the next video.